My name is Daniel Whitaker. I'm 39 years old, and I've been teaching literature at Lincoln High School in Portland, Oregon for the past 12 years. I've always been the kind of person who pays attention to details, whether it's analyzing the subtext in a novel or reading the room during a conversation. I notice things most people miss. That skill served me well in the classroom, but I never imagined I'd need it to survive the worst period of my life. For nearly 2 years, my mother, Margaret, had been fighting advanced stage cancer. The doctors gave her 18 months at most, but she made it to 23. She was tough, stubborn even, right until the very end. During those months, I split my time between her hospital visits, managing her care and trying to keep my marriage afloat. My wife, Jessica, was 36 at the time. We'd been together for 8 years, married for 6, or at least I thought we were together. Looking back now, I can see the signs were there long before I acknowledged them. Jessica started becoming distant about 6 months before my mother's final decline. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Watching someone you love die slowly takes a toll on everyone. But her distance wasn't grief, it was something else entirely. She stopped asking about my mother's condition. She'd show up at the hospital for brief visits, stay 20 minutes, then claim she had work emails to answer. Her phone became an extension of her hand. She'd guard it like it contained state secrets, angling the screen away whenever I walked into a room. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new, unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. The fractures in our marriage widened, but I was too consumed with my mother's care to investigate. I trusted Jessica. That was my mistake. Trust, I've learned, should be earned continuously, not given blindly. 3 weeks before my mother's funeral, I discovered the truth. It happened almost by accident. Jessica had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter. She was in the shower, and I needed to check my email since my phone was dead. When I opened the browser, her Instagram messages were already up on the screen. I wasn't snooping. I didn't need to. It was all right there. Messages from Elliot Granger. We'd both known Elliot back in college. He'd been in our social circle at the University of Oregon, one of those guys who was charming but never quite trustworthy. After graduation, he'd moved to Seattle for work, and we'd lost touch. Or so I thought. Apparently, Jessica hadn't. The messages went back 4 months. 4 months of plans, intimate exchanges, and discussions about their future together. Our future, I should say, because they were planning to use my mother's inheritance to start their new life. Jessica had already told him about the expected payout from the estate. They'd discussed apartments in Seattle, calculated how much they'd need for a down payment, even joked about how convenient the timing was. I stood there in my kitchen, staring at those messages, and something inside me went cold. Not angry, not devastated, just cold. I took photos of everything with my phone. Every message, every plan, every cruel joke about my dying mother being their lucky break. Then I closed the laptop and went about my day as if nothing had happened. When Jessica came downstairs, hair wet, smiling that fake smile she'd perfected, I asked her what she wanted for dinner. She said pasta was fine. We ate in silence, like we'd been doing for months. That night, after she fell asleep, I contacted Richard Morrison, an attorney I knew from a legal consultation I'd done for the school district. I explained my situation. He listened without judgment, took notes, and told me we needed to move quickly. Within 48 hours, I had filed for legal separation. The paperwork was drawn up but not served. Not yet. Richard explained that in Oregon, timing could be critical, and we needed to ensure all assets were properly protected before Jessica had any warning. We were playing the long game. The more important conversation happened with my mother. She was still lucid most days, though the pain medication sometimes clouded her thoughts. I visited her alone one afternoon, sent Jessica on an errand I'd fabricated, and told her everything. I showed her the messages. I expected anger, maybe tears. Instead, she smiled. It was a sad smile, the kind that carries decades of wisdom. I knew something was off, she said, her voice weak but steady. I could see it in how she looked at you, or rather, how she didn't look at you anymore. We spent the next 2 hours going over her estate. My mother had been meticulous about her finances. She'd worked as an accountant for 30 years before retiring, and she understood how to structure assets. Together with Richard, we revised her will. We created trusts, established clear beneficiaries, and built legal barriers that would make it impossible for Jessica to claim anything. Every account was restructured. Every asset was protected. My mother signed the documents with a shaking hand, but her resolve never wavered. She also confirmed what I'd already known, that I'd maintained my own separate checking account throughout the marriage, kept apart from our joint household account. That separation would prove crucial in the coming weeks. "Don't let her take what I built," she told me. "I worked too hard for it to end up funding someone's betrayal." I promised her I wouldn't. That was 2 weeks before she died. During those final 2 weeks, I maintained the facade. I came home every evening, made dinner, asked Jessica about her day. She'd respond with vague answers, her attention always drifting back to her phone. Sometimes I'd catch her smiling at the screen, that private smile people reserve for someone special. It used to be for me. Now it was for Elliot. I'd watch her, studying her like I studied literature with my students, looking for themes, motivations, the narrative arc of her deception. She never suspected I knew. That was her fatal error. She mistook my silence for ignorance. My mother passed away on a Tuesday morning in mid-August of 2025. I was holding her hand when she took her last breath. Jessica was supposed to be there, but she'd texted saying traffic was bad. She arrived 20 minutes after my mother died, still checking her phone as she walked into the hospital room. She hugged me, said all the appropriate words, but I felt nothing. She was a stranger wearing my wife's face. The funeral was scheduled for the following Saturday. Those 4 days between death and burial were a blur of arrangements, phone calls, and paperwork. Jessica helped, in her superficial way. She contacted the funeral home, sent out notifications, ordered flowers. To anyone watching, she seemed like a devoted daughter-in-law. But I noticed the moments when she'd step outside to take calls. I noticed how she'd disappear for hours, claiming she needed to run errands for the service. I knew where she was going, who she was seeing. Richard worked quickly during those days. The legal separation documents were finalized. The estate was settled, everything transferred according to my mother's revised will. Jessica's name appeared nowhere in any of it. Every asset, every account, every piece of property was either in trust or transferred directly to me before my mother's death. It was all legal, all documented, all irreversible. Friday night, the evening before the funeral, Jessica came to me while I was reviewing my eulogy. I was sitting in my home office, the speech spread out on my desk. She walked in without knocking, which she'd started doing months ago, another small sign of eroding respect. "We need to talk," she said. I looked up at her. She was dressed casually, jeans and a sweater, but she'd done her makeup. That struck me as odd for a quiet night at home. Then I realized she'd probably just come back from seeing Elliot. "What about?" I asked. She hesitated, then sat down in the chair across from my desk. For a moment, I thought she might actually confess, that she might show some shred of remorse or honesty. Instead, she said, "I think we should talk about us, about our future." "Our future," I repeated. "What about it?" "Daniel, you know things haven't been right between us for a while. With everything that's happened with your mother, I think we've both been avoiding the real conversation." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "And what conversation is that?" She looked down at her hands. "I think we should separate. Take some time apart. Maybe make it permanent." The audacity of it almost made me laugh. She was going to leave me, but she wanted it framed as a mutual decision. She wanted to walk away clean, with sympathy from our friends and family, maybe even with a piece of the inheritance she assumed was coming. "When did you decide this?" I asked calmly. "It's not sudden. I've been thinking about it for months." "Months," I said. "Interesting timing." She looked up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Just that tomorrow we're burying my mother, and you're choosing tonight to tell me you want a divorce. I'm not trying to make this harder, she said. I just think we should be honest with each other. Honest. The word hung in the air between us like a bad joke. I wanted to throw those messages in her face to watch her scramble for excuses, but I didn't. Instead, I said, if that's what you want, Jessica, we can discuss it after the funeral. Let's just get through tomorrow first. She nodded, looking almost relieved. Okay, yes, after tomorrow. She left the room and I heard her on the phone minutes later, voice low and animated, probably telling Elliot how well it went, how I'd taken it calmly, how everything was proceeding according to plan. She had no idea that her plan had been obsolete for weeks. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies, the kind of perfect late summer weather that feels wrong for a funeral. I dressed in my black suit, the one my mother had bought me for my 30th birthday. Jessica wore a conservative black dress, pearls, the picture of respectful mourning. We drove to the funeral home in separate cars. She claimed she might need to leave early if she got overwhelmed. I knew the real reason. Elliot would be there, lurking somewhere in the crowd, and she wanted the freedom to slip away with him when the opportunity presented itself. The service was held at Morrison & Sons Funeral Home on Burnside Street, a place my mother had selected herself months earlier. She'd prepaid everything, chosen her casket, even written suggestions for the music. Control until the very end. That was Margaret Whitaker. The viewing room filled quickly. My mother had been well loved in the community. Former colleagues from her accounting firm, neighbors, members of her book club, former students of mine who'd met her at school events over the years. The room buzzed with quiet conversations, people sharing memories, offering condolences. Jessica worked the room like she was at a networking event. She hugged people she barely knew, accepted their sympathies with practiced grace, played the grieving daughter-in-law flawlessly. I watched her from across the room and felt nothing but contempt. I saw Elliot too, standing near the back, trying to blend in. He'd shaved his beard since the last time I'd seen him years ago, but I recognized him immediately. He caught my eye once and quickly looked away. Guilt does that to people. The service began at 11. The funeral director, a soft-spoken man named Thomas Bryant, guided everyone to their seats. I sat in the front row. Jessica sat beside me, close enough that people would think we were united in grief, far enough that we weren't actually touching. Behind us, I could hear people settling in, the rustle of programs, the occasional sniffle. Thomas gave the opening remarks, then introduced Pastor Williams from the Methodist church my mother had attended. The pastor spoke for 15 minutes about faith, about Margaret's strength, about the legacy she left behind. It was generic but well-intentioned. When he finished, he turned to me and nodded. My turn. I walked to the podium, my eulogy folded in my jacket pocket, though I barely needed it. I'd memorized every word. I looked out at the assembled crowd, at the faces of people who'd known my mother, who'd respected her. Then I looked at Jessica, sitting in the front row, pretending to dab at her eyes with a tissue while checking her phone. My mother, Margaret Whitaker, taught me many things. I began. My voice was steady, clear. She taught me the value of hard work. She taught me to pay attention to details. She taught me that character reveals itself not in what we say, but in what we do when we think no one is watching. I paused, letting that last line settle over the room. My mother was an accountant for 30 years. She understood numbers, but more than that, she understood people. She could read a balance sheet and tell you not just what the numbers said, but what they meant. What they revealed about the person behind them. She had this gift for seeing patterns, for noticing when something didn't add up. I saw Jessica shift in her seat. Good. In her final months, even while fighting cancer, even while her body was failing her, my mother's mind remained sharp. She noticed things, changes in behavior, inconsistencies, small betrayals disguised as kindness. I wasn't looking at Jessica anymore, but I could feel her attention locked on me. She noticed, for instance, when someone would visit her hospital room but spend more time on their phone than talking to her. She noticed when someone claimed to be running errands but returned hours later with nothing to show for it. She noticed patterns of absence, convenient excuses, and the peculiar coldness that sometimes masquerades as stress. The room had gone completely silent. People were listening now, really listening, sensing that this wasn't a standard eulogy. My mother told me something important during our last real conversation. She said that loyalty isn't proven in grand gestures, but in the accumulation of small, consistent actions over time. She said that betrayal works the same way. It's rarely one big moment. It's dozens of little moments, little choices, little lies that build into something massive. I pulled out a small stack of papers from my jacket pocket. Not my eulogy. Something else. I didn't read from them, just held them, visible enough that Jessica could see them from where she sat. 3 weeks before my mother died, she made some changes to her estate. She was very specific about what she wanted and why. She wanted to ensure that everything she'd worked for, every dollar she'd earned, every asset she'd accumulated over 40 years of careful planning, would go to people who valued loyalty and integrity. She wanted to make sure that her legacy couldn't be claimed by anyone who was simply waiting for her to die so they could start their new life. Jessica stood up abruptly. Her face had gone white. Several people turned to look at her. She mumbled something about needing air and moved toward the aisle. But I wasn't finished. My mother also taught me about documentation. She was an accountant after all. She believed that everything important should be recorded, verified, and filed properly. So when she discovered that someone close to our family was planning to use her inheritance to fund a new relationship, to finance a fresh start with someone else, she made sure to document everything. Phone records, text messages, financial discussions about how much money they expected to receive and how they planned to spend it. Jessica froze halfway up the aisle. I could see her shoulders shaking. Elliot had already slipped out of the room. The beautiful thing about truth, I continued, my voice still calm, still measured, is that it doesn't need volume. It doesn't need theatrics. It just needs to be spoken clearly, at the right moment, to the right people. My mother understood that. She understood that sometimes the most powerful form of justice is simply allowing people to face the natural consequences of their own choices. I folded the papers and put them back in my pocket. Then I looked directly at Jessica, who was still standing in the aisle, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of grief, tears of humiliation and rage. Mom, you taught me well. You taught me to read the room, to trust documentation over words, and to never confuse silence with ignorance. Rest in peace knowing that everything you built is exactly where you wanted it to be, protected, secured, and beyond the reach of anyone who mistook your generosity for weakness. I stepped away from the podium. The room remained silent for several long seconds. Then Pastor Williams stood, clearly unsure how to proceed, and suggested we move to the burial site. People began filing out slowly, whispering to each other, glancing between me and Jessica. Jessica didn't come to the burial. She left the funeral home through a side exit, stumbling in her heels, her carefully applied makeup streaked down her face. I saw her get into her car and speed out of the parking lot. Several people asked if she was all right, if someone should go after her. I simply said she was overwhelmed with grief. Let them interpret that however they wanted. At the cemetery, under the gray canopy they'd set up beside the grave site, I stood with my mother's closest friends and watched as they lowered her casket into the ground. It was a small group now, maybe 20 people. The pastor said a final prayer. People threw flowers onto the casket. Some cried. I didn't. I'd done my crying in private weeks ago, when I'd realized I was losing the only person who'd truly had my back. After everyone had left, I stayed behind for a few minutes. Just me and the gravediggers waiting respectfully at a distance. I looked down at the fresh earth, at the flowers scattered across the casket. Thanks, Mom, I said quietly, for everything. Then I walked back to my car and drove home. Jessica's things were already gone. She must have packed while I was at the cemetery. Her closet was empty, her toiletries cleared from the bathroom. Even the photos of her had been removed from the walls. She'd left behind the photos of us together. Probably figured I'd want to burn them myself. On the kitchen counter, I found an envelope. Inside were divorce papers already signed by her, along with a brief handwritten note. You humiliated me in front of everyone, in front of your dead mother. You're cruel and vindictive, and I'm glad I'm getting away from you. My lawyer will be in touch about the estate settlement. I almost laughed. Her lawyer would be in touch about the estate settlement, as if there was anything to settle. I took a photo of the note, added it to my growing file of documentation, then called Richard. She's gone, I told him. She left the divorce papers. Good, he said. That makes this easier. I'll file them Monday morning. With the separation documents already in place and the estate transfers completed before your mother's death, there's nothing for her to contest. Oregon is an equitable distribution state, but given that your mother's assets were transferred to you prior to death and never commingled with marital property, Jessica has no claim. The house is in your name, purchased before the marriage. Your teacher's pension is protected. She'll walk away with exactly what she brought into the marriage, which, if I recall correctly, was about $14,000 in credit card debt that you paid off. What about Elliot? I asked. What about him? He's not party to your divorce, though if Jessica's planning on using him as a financial safety net, she might want to reconsider. I did some checking. Elliot Granger works in sales for a medical supply company in Seattle. Makes about $70,000 a year. Has a one-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill that rents for $2,300 a month. And according to his social media, likes to spend money on mountain biking equipment and craft beer. He's not exactly a meal ticket. I thanked Richard and hung up. Then I poured myself a scotch, my mother's favorite brand, and sat on my back porch watching the sun set over the neighborhood. It was quiet, peaceful, even. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. Jessica didn't contest anything. She couldn't. Every asset was accounted for, every protection in place. She tried, through her lawyer, to argue that she deserved something for emotional distress and years of support during my mother's illness. Richard shut that down with a single letter outlining her documented affair, her plans to use inheritance money with her boyfriend, and the timeline of her betrayal. Her lawyer advised her to take the settlement and move on. She did. In the days following the funeral, several colleagues from school reached out to me. Some had been at the service and witnessed everything. They didn't ask direct questions, but their messages made it clear they understood what had happened. A few of my mother's friends called as well, offering support and, surprisingly, sharing that they'd never quite trusted Jessica. It was validating in a strange way, knowing that others had seen what I'd been too blind to notice earlier. I heard through mutual friends that she moved to Seattle with Elliot. They lasted about 4 months. Apparently, reality didn't match their romantic fantasy. Living in a cramped apartment on a single income, dealing with actual bills instead of imagined inheritance money, trying to build a relationship on the foundation of betrayal, it all fell apart quickly. Last I heard, Jessica moved back to Portland and was working as an office manager for a dental practice. We've never spoken since the funeral. As for me, I kept teaching. Lincoln High offered me department chair the following spring, and I accepted. The promotion came with a salary increase that brought me to just over $85,000 a year, comfortable for Portland, and a validation of my years of dedication. The work kept me focused, gave me purpose. I started a book club in my mother's honor, meeting every other Thursday at the local library. We read everything from classics to contemporary fiction, and I found genuine joy in discussing literature with people who cared about it as much as I did. I sold the house about a year later. Too many memories, both good and bad. I bought a smaller place in the Hawthorne district, close to cafes and bookstores, the kind of neighborhood my mother would have loved. I used some of her inheritance to establish a scholarship fund at the University of Oregon for students studying accounting, named after her. It wasn't about the money. It was about making sure her legacy meant something beyond the numbers. I dated occasionally, though I was cautious. Trust doesn't come easily after what I'd been through, but I came to understand people better, to spot the warning signs, to value consistency over chemistry. It became clear to me that loyalty is demonstrated through actions, not words, and that the right person will show up even when things are difficult, especially when things are difficult. Looking back now from this vantage point in 2028, 3 years after my mother's death, I don't regret how I handled things. Some people might say I was cold, calculating, even cruel for exposing Jessica at my mother's funeral. But here's what they don't understand. I didn't expose her. I simply allowed the truth to exist in the same room as all those people who thought they knew her. I let her face the natural consequences of choices she'd made freely, repeatedly, for months. I didn't destroy her life. She did that herself, one text message, one lie, one betrayal at a time. My mother taught me that revenge isn't about volume or spectacle. It's about clarity. It's about making sure that people understand exactly what happened and why, without distortion or spin. It's about documentation, timing, and the cold satisfaction of watching someone realize that they've been seen all along. Jessica thought she was clever, thought she was careful, thought she could wait out my mother's death and walk away with both sympathy and money. She underestimated 2 things: my mother's sharp mind and my willingness to pay attention. In the end, that miscalculation cost her everything she'd planned for. I visit my mother's grave every few months. I bring fresh flowers, usually sunflowers, which were her favorite. I tell her about the scholarship recipients, about the book club, about the small, quiet life I've built from the ashes of that terrible year. And sometimes when I'm there alone, I thank her again for teaching me that silence isn't weakness. Sometimes silence is strategy. Sometimes silence is the loudest statement you can make. The funny thing about betrayal is that it reveals character on both sides. It shows you who someone really is when they think they're getting away with something. But it also shows you who you are when everything falls apart. What I discovered is that I'm my mother's son. Patient, observant, strategic, and absolutely unwilling to let anyone mistake my kindness for stupidity. That's the real legacy she left me. Not the money, not the house, not the carefully structured trusts and legal protections. She left me the understanding that justice doesn't always come from courts or confrontations. Sometimes it comes from simply documenting the truth, protecting what matters, and letting people face the consequences they've earned. Jessica wanted a fresh start funded by my mother's death. Instead, she got exactly what she deserved. Nothing but the truth spoken clearly at the moment it would hurt the most. And me? I got to keep my integrity, my mother's legacy, and the peace of mind that comes from knowing I never stooped to her level. I just matched her energy with preparation, her deception with documentation, and her betrayal with the cold, clean precision of consequences. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.